Have you ever had a moment where you looked at yourself not in a mirror, but in the silence of your own mind and thought, how did I become this person? Not in the grand, cinematic way of life flashing before your eyes, but in the quiet, haunting realization that you've slowly drifted into a version of yourself you never consciously chose. Imagine standing alone in a dimly lit room. No noise, no distractions, just you. No job title, no relationship labels, no clothes, no roles. Just the raw essence of whatever you call yourself. And now imagine this. What if that self was just a story you've agreed to? A role you've been playing in a theater built by fear, expectation, and habit? What if your identity, what you call me, isn't something you are, but something you've been becoming without even noticing? Here's the paradox. We spend our lives trying to find ourselves, as if we were some lost object buried under years of noise. But what if the truth is far more unsettling? What if there is no fixed self to find only the self you choose to become, again and again, with every action, every silence, every compromise? What if the real danger isn't in losing who you are, but in becoming someone you never intended to be? You weren't born a coward. You weren't born bitter or passive or performative. Those were choices, small ones, maybe, but choices nonetheless. And over time, they hardened into habits, then into traits, then into identity. You didn't decide to hide your dreams, but you did decide not to speak up that one time when it mattered. You didn't set out to be submissive to others' expectations, but you nodded quietly, laughed politely, and adjusted yourself just enough to be accepted. You became tolerable, likable, predictable. And now, here you are living a version of life that looks good on paper, but feels hollow at 2A. A self sculpted not by your essence, but by your compromises. But what if you could go back to that first moment, the first time you said yes when you wanted to say no? The first time you stayed silent to avoid judgment? The first time you looked into someone else's eyes to know what you were supposed to feel? Would you still do it? Would you still trade authenticity for belonging? Would you still betray yourself to protect the illusion of being someone good? Because here is the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. You are not who you are. You are who you let yourself become. And most people let themselves become safe. They let themselves become the version of them that causes the least friction, the fewest arguments, the cleanest record. But cleanliness isn't truth. Agreement isn't growth, and acceptance isn't freedom. Sartre once said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." Not what his parents made of him, not what his past dictated, not what his culture suggested, only what he makes in every moment of choice. So the question isn't, who are you? The question is far more terrifying. Who are you letting yourself become right now, without even realizing it? Because every time you say nothing, you become smaller. Every time you avoid discomfort, you become less alive. Every time you betray your truth for harmony, you become a shadow of the person you could be. But here's the door, the crack in the illusion. If you are what you become, then you can become otherwise. You can choose, and not just once, but every single day, with every yes and every no, with every confrontation and every act of courage. But to do that, you must first see the machine, the hidden force beneath your choices, the invisible hand shaping who you become. Because the real enemy isn't fear. It's the unconscious agreement to become less quietly, politely, without ever being asked. And if you want to break it, you have to look it in the eye. So let's do that now. Let's expose what's really shaping you beneath the surface, beyond personality, beneath the labels and masks. Because once you see it, you can never unsee it. You were told that identity is something you discover, like it's buried treasure waiting to be unearthed. But what if that's the first lie? What if identity isn't found, it's forged? Not in moments of clarity, but in the slow, silent decisions you make when no one's watching. Not in grand transformations, but in quiet surrender. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre didn't believe we're born with some fixed essence. He believed we are existence before essence, which means you exist first and only then become what you are. Your identity is not a pre-written script. It's a work in progress, a sculpture shaped by your own hands, whether you admit it or not. But here's the problem. Most people don't sculpt with intention. They sculpt out of fear, out of shame, out of a desperate need to belong. And so their identity becomes a mask, a survival strategy, a carefully constructed lie built on small betrayals. You told yourself you were shy, but maybe you were just tired of being ignored. You told yourself you were just being realistic, but maybe you gave up before you even tried. You started to believe the roles others gave you. The quiet one, the responsible one, the nice one. Each role became a wall, each wall a prison. Sartre called it bad faith, when we lie to ourselves to avoid the weight of our freedom. Because freedom is terrifying. It means you can no longer blame your past, your parents, or your personality. It means you are responsible for what you become. And that weight is unbearable for most, so they run. Not physically, but psychologically. They hide in jobs they hate, relationships that numb them, ideologies that comfort them. They say things like, "That's just who I am," as if identity were a fixed object instead of a living choice. But the truth? They are fleeing from the terror of becoming, because to become means to face the abyss. Carl Jung warned of this too. He said that what we do not make conscious, we will call fate. We'll say, "I had no choice." But that's never true. You had a choice. You always have, even when it feels like you don't. You can choose to confront the lies. You can choose to destroy the roles. You can choose to speak, to act, to live in alignment with what you really want, even if it terrifies you. But it comes at a cost: comfort, certainty, belonging. And that's why most never choose it. Because becoming who you truly are means sacrificing who you were trained to be. It means disappointing people. It means breaking patterns. It means feeling lost before you ever feel free. But here's the deeper truth. There is no self without freedom, and there is no freedom without responsibility. You are what you do, not what you feel, not what you intend, not what you say on your best days, but what you consistently do when no one is watching. And every time you act out of fear, you reinforce the prison. Every time you pretend, it becomes harder to remember what's real. This is how it happens. This is how people become strangers to themselves. Not through trauma, not through catastrophe, but through repetition. The repeated, unconscious choice to abandon their real self for the sake of peace. The slow erosion of integrity. The silent death of agency. Until one day, they wake up and ask, "How did I get here?" And the answer is simple. One small compromise at a time. But you're not doomed. You're not fixed. You're not trapped. Because the very thing that built your false self-choice is the same thing that can tear it down. But you must be willing to see it, to name the lies, to admit the comfort of the cage. Only then does the door appear. But you have to walk through it. You have to say, "I am not who I pretended to be. I am not who others told me I was. I am only what I choose to become from this moment forward." So the question now is, are you ready to see the consequences of not choosing? Because they are already shaping you. It doesn't feel like anything at first. That's the most dangerous part. You make one small compromise. You hold your tongue. You smile when you want to scream. You say yes when every cell in your body begs you to say no, and nothing explodes. The world keeps spinning. People even seem pleased with you. You survive. So you do it again. and again and again, until the gap between your inner world and your outer behavior becomes so wide you can't see the bottom. And still you function. You go to work. You scroll your phone. You laugh at the right moments. But something is rotting underneath, because the self you perform is not the self you are. And eventually, the cost of that performance becomes unbearable. Not suddenly, not with a bang, but with a slow, gnawing decay. You begin to feel hollow like a mannequin in your own life. You start forgetting what you actually want. Not because your desires disappeared, but because you buried them too deep to access without pain. You stop trusting yourself. You second-guess every decision. You ask others for their opinion before checking in with your own. You lose the compass. And the worst part? The world rewards you for it. They call you mature, easygoing, well-adjusted. Inside, you feel like a ghost, alive but not living, seen but never known. You start to think you're depressed. Maybe you are, but maybe you're not sick. Maybe you're just suffocating under the weight of who you're not. Because when you deny your truth long enough, your soul doesn't explode. It shrinks. And here's where the consequences become dangerous, not just to your inner world, but to society at large. When millions of people live like this, playing roles, hiding pain, avoiding freedom, something profound happens. Society becomes a theater of shadows. Everyone acting, no one speaking truth, no one disrupting the script. You get a culture obsessed with appearances, with surface-level smiles, with curated perfection, and beneath it, an epidemic of quiet desperation. Addictions skyrocket, not just to substances, but to validation, to productivity, to distraction. Because anything is better than sitting with the question, who have I let myself become? Consumerism thrives. Because the emptier you feel, the more you buy to fill the void. Entertainment dominates. Because silence would reveal the screaming underneath, conformity spreads. Because rebellion requires self-trust, and most people have forgotten how. We call it normal. We call it success. But it's collapse dressed in luxury, numbed by dopamine, wrapped in productivity. And here's the sickest twist. You don't even have to be forced into this prison. You volunteer for it. You cooperate with your own erosion. Because waking up would mean facing the horror that you've spent years building a self that isn't you. That you betrayed your own becoming for comfort, for applause, for safety. And that realization? It will break you, but it will also set you free. Because if you were the one who built the prison, then you are the only one who can tear it down. But first, you must feel the weight of what's been lost. The friendships that never formed because you weren't being real. The opportunities you never chased because you believed you weren't enough. The passions you buried because someone once told you they were impractical. These aren't abstract tragedies. They are your life, stolen by your own silence. But not forever. Because now you see it, the trap beneath the routine, the cost of pretending, the quiet agony of becoming what the world wanted instead of what your soul needed. And that means you're no longer asleep. The illusions are cracking. The theater lights are flickering. And for the first time in years, you're standing backstage aware. So the question is no longer what happened to me. It's far more urgent. What will I do now that I see the truth? Because the path forward isn't easy, but it's real. And real is the only thing that will ever satisfy your soul. So let's begin the rebellion. Let's dismantle the false self piece by piece. Let's remember the terrifying, exhilarating truth. You are free, and that means you are responsible. It begins with a whisper, not a war cry, not a speech, just a single, quiet thought. I'm done pretending. That's the beginning of the rebellion, not against the world, but against the version of you that made peace with imprisonment. It doesn't start with changing your life. It starts with changing your stance, your posture toward yourself, your refusal to lie to your soul any longer. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stop cooperating with your own erasure. Because the most radical act you can take in a world addicted to roles is to be real, to speak what you actually think, to want what you actually want, to stop asking for permission to exist as yourself. Sartre said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. You can't rewrite your past. You can't erase the years you spent becoming someone else. But you can start now with one raw, honest moment. That's where power begins. Not in domination, but in authenticity. Not in noise, but in the quiet conviction of a person who no longer needs to be anything other than true." And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to be acceptable, you become magnetic, because realness is rare. And in a desert of performance, your truth is water. But don't confuse rebellion with rage. You don't need to burn your life down. You don't need to scream your truth in the face of everyone who once misunderstood you. You just need to stop abandoning yourself. That's the real revolution. The one where you stop asking others to validate your existence. Stop looking for signs. Stop waiting for approval. Stop bargaining with your truth. And start doing what feels like coming home. Maybe that means walking away from a job that makes you feel invisible. Maybe that means saying, "I love you," when your ego begs you to stay guarded. Maybe that means crying in front of someone for the first time without apologizing for your tears. These aren't grand gestures. They are sacred ruptures. Tiny moments where the false self dies and the real you steps forward. But be warned, freedom is lonely at first. When you stop performing, you'll lose your audience. When you stop conforming, you'll lose the applause. When you start choosing your soul over your image, you'll watch people drift away. Let them, because what's left, what remains after the shedding, is yours. And for the first time, you'll feel what it means to live without hiding, to live without editing, to live without shame. And then something shifts. You start speaking from a different place, acting from a deeper knowing, walking into rooms with a quiet fire behind your eyes. Not because you're fearless, but because you are finally aligned. You stop trying to become someone and start expressing who you already are. No more masks. No more performance. No more delay. And yes, it will be painful. There will be grief. You'll mourn the version of yourself that played by the rules, that tried so hard to be what everyone wanted. But that version was never you. It was just a placeholder, a shadow. Now the real one emerges. The one who never needed to be perfect, just honest. And when you walk that path, even trembling, even uncertain, you'll start to recognize something in others too. You'll see the ones who are also waking up, also shedding, also choosing truth over comfort. And those people, they'll become your true family, not bound by blood, but by courage. Because in a world addicted to illusions, the ones who dare to be real are warriors. So here it is, your moment, your line in the sand, the quiet, unglamorous beginning of a life built on truth. Not ease, not approval, not safety, but truth. Because truth is where power lives. And freedom? Freedom begins when you finally say, "No more." There's a moment in every honest life when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence around you, but the silence within. The silence of all the things you never said. The versions of you that never got to live. The truths you buried so deeply, even your own reflection forgot how to recognize them. And then one day, you hear it. A voice not loud, but unmistakably real, saying, "This isn't who I am." And finally, you listen. That's when the final truth arrives. Not as a lightning strike, not as a neatly packaged answer, but as a subtle, earth-shifting knowing. You were never meant to be anyone. you were meant to become. You are not a fixed identity. You are a field of potential. You are not a title, a role, or a reputation. You are the awareness behind it all, capable of transforming with every breath. And that's what they never told you. You weren't born with a script. You were born with a blank page. But somewhere along the line, fear convinced you to write in pencil what was meant to be written in fire. You let the world define your margins. You let your pain dictate the plot. You let your survival strategies become your personality. But now, standing in the wreckage of everything you thought you had to be, you see the truth with terrifying clarity. You are free. And freedom isn't the absence of limits. It's the presence of responsibility. Freedom means you no longer get to blame your past. You no longer get to say, I didn't have a choice. You no longer get to hide behind who you've been. Because now you know, who you are is not given, it's chosen. And you must choose every day, in every act, who you are becoming. Even in your silence, you are becoming. Even in your avoidance, you are becoming. Even in your smallest decision, you are carving out the shape of your becoming. There is no neutral. There is no pause button, only forward. So the question that remains, the one that will follow you like a shadow until the day you die, is not, who am I? But what am I willing to become? And this isn't a one-time decision. It's not a New Year's resolution. It's a daily reckoning. You will be tempted to retreat, to go back to what's safe, predictable, acceptable, to numb out again, to shrink again. But the deeper self, the one that remembers, will never be satisfied by survival. It wants more. It wants depth. It wants integrity. And that part of you, the part that knows you were meant for something truer, something bolder, something real, it's still alive, waiting. And all it asks is this: when the moment comes to choose, when your comfort and your becoming collide, will you betray your truth again? Or will you finally say, this time I choose myself? Because in the end, no one remembers the roles you played. No one cares about the version of you that fit in. What remains, what echoes, is how honestly you lived, how boldly you chose, how deeply you became who you really are. So write the next page, not with ink, but with fire. Burn the mask, mourn the past, and begin again, not as who you've been, but as the person you are always capable of becoming.